Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is our first interdisciplinary AI research network and research presentation. And we are going to go over quick purpose of these events and event series. So we are aware that AI become mainstream and many people just start using AI in daily work or activities. And there's also interest in AI research. Organizations, institutions, private and public, funding those AI research to develop better and better models. And many research institutions dedicated some certain group to advance their AI-related research agenda. And we look at our institution and we just saw great researcher. I'm serious. I was very impressed. Everyone doing great stuff at Iselin University. And the idea that how we can create a platform to bring those people together, give them a chance to present what amazing work they are doing, and connect other people, and kindle some new kind of research direction or idea. This series aimed to present amazing work that our researchers doing at Iselin University, and followed by a networking event to establish new connection, maybe new research ideas to explore. And one of the important purpose of this event, hopefully in a few years, maybe next year, maybe end of this year, I want to build, as a director of AI, build a network of researcher multidisciplinary. We are going to explore external grants. This is one of the grant, National Artificial Intelligence Pilot Program. They are giving billions of dollars for AI researchers, multidisciplinary. And we are looking for many different grant opportunities here, such as humanities, art and science, engineering, business schools, communications, psychology, and whatever discipline you are in. Most importantly, I want to highlight something very concrete and show you recent grants. I just want to get your attention in this slide for a minute. There is a new National Science Foundation grant opportunities, and when you look at, they are giving people almost $1 million, $10 million, $15 million to open interdisciplinary AI research centers or AI centers. I would just say not only research. And look at one of the recipients of this grant and their naming. AI Institution for Engaged Learning, NC States. And when I just saw that, I said, okay, engaged learning was our stuff. We need to get that grant, but NC State just apply and get it. The purpose of these research network and research presentations to establish a future that we can just explore these grant opportunities together and seek for one of those high grants to make our institution competitive. But it starts with all individuals sharing their idea, collaborating. We have a series of people joining us from different disciplines, from business schools, we have communication schools, art and sciences, psychology departments, and other disciplines. We are very excited for all of our participants and researchers joining us today, and hopefully it's going to bring some new insight to everyone. Today, we are going to host one of our most prolific, talented researcher. I am personally very impressed. I do research on science of science I was interested in. And one of my research interests, developing automated meta-analytic systems to extract information from the articles and make this process much more smoother and easier. And I discover we have already a person published and working on this research area. And I was just very impressed her work. I'm talking Dr. Anne-Marie Iselin, and she's joining us from a psychology department, and she has an impressive series of research. She's, if I'm not wrong, known for meta-analytic framework that she's working. And please join me to welcome her on our stage.
Switched it over. I appreciate that. So, yeah, today I have a bit an agenda, but I'm also collaborative, and it's a reasonable group here that I want to be open to questions as they come online for you, especially when I'm doing some demos. So what I'll be, can you all hear me okay? Perfect. What I'm going to be talking about today is how we might be able to use Elicit AI as an AI platform for streamlining meta-analyses, particularly in my case, complex meta-analyses that involve more than two variables. So most meta-analyses look at a relation between two variables. About 10 years ago, there were advances in structural equation modeling and meta-analytic analyses, and a professor at National University of Singapore merged the two so that we can start looking at pathways of more than two variables, of one variable that causes another variable that causes an outcome. And when we think about that, it gets really complicated in terms of the wealth of resources that are out there and are published on these variables. And so we'll talk about how Elicit can streamline those more complex kinds of meta-analyses. So I do just have to identify some conflicts of interest. For the manuscript that I'm going to present at the end of the talk, Elicit provided unlimited credits. So this was about a year and a half ago. Elicit has been changing so rapidly. I say back in the day, and I mean about 6 months ago. And that's true for all AI. But when we were doing our project, they were running on credits, and they allowed us unlimited credits to run our evaluation project. I've also been in an ongoing relationship with Elicit for about a year and a half now, doing alpha and beta testing of some of their products and functionalities. And then they're paying me now to look at how well we can replicate meta-analysis using their systematic meta-analysis functionality that's just come out. My outline and plan is to first of all talk to you a little bit about how does a licensed child clinical psychologist get involved in AI. I'm not an AI researcher. I guess I should start identifying as that, but that's not my original source identity. So I'll talk a little bit about how I landed with Elicit. I'll talk about where I believe Elicit's functionality maps on best to the steps in a meta-analysis. I'll demonstrate how we used Elicit in the manuscript that I'll be presenting, and then that will be the manuscript about how evaluating whether Elicit can reduce the time it takes for decision makers to make decisions about whether to include or exclude studies in a meta-analysis. And then we'll open it up for questions and conversations, and I certainly have ideas for future directions as well that we can talk about in the networking portion of this. So how did I get to Elicit? Mustafa nailed it pretty well. I started doing meta-analyses when I was a graduate student in the early 2000s. And I thought I was doing a big meta-analysis back then. We ultimately had about 100 studies that were included in that meta-analysis. And I remember, just to date myself a little bit, I remember going home for the break and putting like the actual bound dissertations that I was coding in my suitcase and taking them home with me. That was the way we were coding, was actual like papers and bound dissertations. So that was my first dissertation many years ago, and then actually an Elon student wanted to do a meta-analysis with me. And we started learning about all these new different programs for meta-analyses through Jesse, and that's how I connected with Jesse. And from Lauren's project, who's now a graduate student at University of Virginia, I started thinking about, there's all these functionalities now, maybe we should do some more complex, right? This is too easy, let's make it more challenging for ourselves. And so I reached out to Jesse to help me, who's, I have to acknowledge him as a partner in all of this, because when he did the search with me, we ultimately landed around 40,000 articles. And I said, I want to do this, and how can I do this? And landed at Elicit AI as a program that could allow us to have this large number of studies and bring it down to something that's more manageable. my colleague Jamie and I disagree about how we actually found Elicit as the platform of choice. I say he told me about it, he says I told him about Elicit. We have now agreed that Elicit found us as a connector, so we're not really sure how we landed on Elicit, but it was a good find. It's been a great experience learning about and building our knowledge about Elicit. So this is a very distilled version of the workflow of a meta-analytic review. We do a search of studies. We then do title abstract screening, full text reviews, and the numbers are winnowing down, right, throughout this. What I'm going to focus on today is where I think Elicit functions the best. There are lots of resources, AI-based resources out there for identifying studies and for title abstract screening, and so where Elicit really outperforms other platforms is in full text reviews, which includes data extraction of those full text reviews, and those were the two places that we were looking to evaluate Elicit, and where I think if you're interested in using Elicit in a meta-analysis, it can be particularly fruitful. So what I want to show you right now is some of the different ways of using Elicit. I'll demonstrate how you can bring papers into Elicit, how you can tag papers to organize them and access them more readily. I'll then show you how you can extract data from Elicit and put it into an Excel file that you can use outside of the platform. And then I'm going to tell you both demonstrations because I'm just going to flow from one to the other. Once you get the data out of Elicit, you can format it within Excel. We just used a simple macro to do that. And then we shared it among my other collaborators on the research project as an Excel file, well, actually multiple Excel files with each other. And then I'll show you how we actually engaged in the inclusion, exclusion decisions in our studies. So the full text review phase of a meta-analysis involves looking at inclusion and exclusion criteria. And Elicit can extract answers to make decisions about whether to include or exclude based on the criteria that the researcher sets. So I talk about data extraction. When we're talking about data extraction in this study, it's extracting data to make an inclusion-exclusion decision. We can also extract data from Elicit to code effect sizes and moderator codes, which come later in the meta-analytic process, which is a future direction that we're looking towards. Any questions before I jump into the demonstration about meta-analyses? Okay. Let me show a little bit of what Elicit looks like. So to frame this, I am using a paid version. This is Elicit Pro, so there might be functions here that are not visible in the free version. The free version allows you to do quite a bit, actually, but probably not enough to do a full meta-analysis. And I'm actually able to show you this Elicit Pro version because we received an Academic Technology Committee grant, and we're using this to bring students into the research with AI. So this access is because of that funding. So one of the ways, so we have here, this recent is all of the different queries that I've done. Here in library, I have a reasonable library here of about 600 items. So these are all articles that I have input into Elicit as part of different stages of the meta-analysis. This is not inclusive of every article. But the way that we were including articles is there's two different ways. You can upload articles here. You would just click here, and you can pull them from a personal library, for example, if you wanted to import them. If you had a folder on your desktop and you knew which articles you wanted to import, you could just drag and drop them into here. I'm going to show you a different way of doing this. So, and oftentimes folks, I'll take a step back, most folks are using Elicit to find literature, to ask a research question, for it to search and find a literature base for you. And I think that Elicit does that well. From a meta-analytics standpoint, I wouldn't rely on Elicit. Elicit uses what's called a semantic search, using Semantic Scholar. So we'll use context and language and meaning to pull articles in. The typical search for psychological research and many other researchers that uses the gold standard, which is a PRISMA requirement, require reproducibility of your search terms, and those are Boolean searches. And so in our meta-analysis, we went with PRISMA Boolean searches. This Elicit semantic search might be a nice way to augment a Boolean search because it might pull in other literature that isn't picked up with based on keywords. But for our project, we weren't interested in using Elicit to find the literature for us. But that is definitely one of the functions that's useful in Elicit, especially when you're working with students. When they have a research question, it helps them redefine, refine their research question and find the right literature base for themselves. Instead, though, for us, we were just saying we located these articles and we want to input them. And so you can go to Quick Tools here and say extract data from PDFs, and then choose to upload papers. The way that we were working with articles for this meta-analysis was in Zotero. And so you can just drag, right, so it's typically hidden under here, but you can just drag and drop from Zotero. So I'm going to drag and drop these four so you can see this whole process. So it's telling me it's working with the stars, the check marks are saying that it uploaded them. It'll tell you when it has errors, right? So if an article didn't fully upload, it'll tell you that. Let's see, it's a duplicate, that's why. So it's already in my library, which is why there's an error coming out. Elicit has gotten really well at being able to upload lots of different types of papers for our meta-analysis. Sometimes we have 300-400 page dissertations. It can load those, so it's gotten better over the last year and a half. Initially it was having some difficulties, but it does a really nice job now. And so I've just identified these 3 different articles, and then I can click next. I would recommend we would tag articles here. Tagging them allows them to be easily sorted and found within libraries. Your library can get really big because there's no folders within the library, so tagging them is like putting them into a folder. And so I created, in preparation for this talk, I created a tag called AI Demo. So it's going to tag just those articles that I brought into Zotero, and then I can click Finish. And so here it's just selected those 3 articles that I've input out of the 600 papers, making it a lot easier to move forward. So at this stage, you're selecting articles that you want to extract data from. And it brings you to this page here where you've got details about the article. You can see here, you can continue to add papers if you want to expand on the search. You can sort by a variety of different factors. Most relevant, most recent in terms of what's been uploaded most recently. I have recently used Zotero to just identify, as part of our search strategy, to identify the 25 most highly cited articles in the articles that we move forward to full text review. And I was able to do that by putting in 700 or so articles and then saying which were the top most cited articles and then choosing them that way. So it also has uses, especially this most and least cited is a useful way of sorting and then identifying that characteristic. I believe they're going to be adding more characteristics.
That's in Elicit, right? That's not in Zotero that you're doing most of this.
Yes, right. This is all, and it's pulling those citations, I imagine, from Semantic Scholar, where it does its searching. I think Ellen taught me that.
It does the most ones.
Was that?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Other questions, or are you seeing anything that you want me to probe? I hope that at this, I do want to make sure that I address any questions. Okay, so this is us trying to figure out if the study is going to meet inclusion and exclusion criteria. The way that you start extracting data is through columns. Elicit creates these preset columns for you. They're actually pretty decent in terms of getting at key characteristics of the study. So I'll just show you, if you want to use their preset, we'll do methodology here. If you want to use their preset column, you just add it here, and you can see it's working. I put 3 papers in. It's telling me how many it's worked through and how many answers it's gathering there. While Elicit is working, this little toggle here allows you to turn on high accuracy mode. This is a mode that uses more energy. Back in the day, it used more tokens to run. It does provide better answers than the average standard accuracy. But for basic things, like if you're just looking for the mean age of the study or the number of participants in the study, you don't need to be using high accuracy. Elicit does a good job for those really low inference kinds of criteria. So you can see here, it's results. If you click on here, so since I've added the column, you can click on methodology here, and you can edit it. So they have, Elicit has pre-entered all of these descriptions for you under here. So this is the description that they used to generate this answer. If you don't like it, you can just edit it right in here and change it, and then when you click save, it'll update and rerun. The other thing that I want to point out here is this is just an open structure answer that it'll provide. You can also ask it to give something like a list of answers that you're looking for, which would be the specified, and you can add a variety of different numbers, or different answers, and then this is a yes, no, maybe, and I can show you what that looks like, but for inclusion, exclusion criteria, you can say yes if it meets the criteria, say no if it doesn't, and then you get a yes, no, and a maybe answer in that column, so it's not as detailed. Okay, so I'm not going to edit this, but it's there. Oh, another thing that you can do here when you're editing, let me show you, you can do save as preset. This is a really nice functionality that they added, in that if you create your own column, if you save it as a preset, it will always be there for you in the future, which saved us a lot of time when we were running multiple queries. We didn't have to re-enter each query every time that we wanted to run it. So saving it as a preset for your own prompts is really helpful. And then for this, you just click off and on. You'll get different answers based on that. I'm just going to close this out here. And I'll show you what we did. So we wrote our own prompts. To be clear, we spent several weeks playing in Elicit about 1.5 years ago. This is my colleague me and my colleague Shaya, who's at SUNY Portland. Played around with Elicit a lot, and then we spent several weeks trialing our prompts, engineering prompts. So the prompts that you're going to see here were prompts that underwent multiple evaluations of, are they producing the answers that we want? We consulted with the Elicit product team about whether we were using the prompts correctly when we were using them. So there's front-end effort that goes into prompt engineering in all of this. And I'll show you what we did just so you can see. We also, back in the day, had tokens, and so we also were able to, I'm going to show you this construct measure here, we were able to ask about multiple constructs, so instead of having multiple columns and being charged multiple times, you can ask it multiple questions within a prompt. So for our particular study that we were looking at, we had 5 inclusion-exclusion criteria. One was that it needed to be a quantitative study, a primary source, collecting participants. We removed and excluded meta-analyses or narrative reviews or commentaries. So that this prompt is getting at, is it quantitative? What's the mean age of the participants? We were only interested in children and adolescents. And then this is telling us the 3 variables that we were looking for. So to be included in the meta-analysis, the study had to include 3 variables, a variable for parenting behaviors, a variable for self-regulation, and a variable for mental health. And so this was the query for all 3 of those constructs. And so I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. So this is the description that I will put into here. And then paste our prompt. Yeah, this took several weeks to get to the right one. And then I've just created my own prompt, and so I'll show you what that variable looks like. One of the nice things about Elicit is that you can ask it to organize its answers in whatever way you want, which when you're reading an article, it's unpredictable where you're going to find different variables. And so here we had an order that coders had to make decisions based on. If parenting wasn't there, it was an automatic exclude. If parenting was there, then you look for mental health outcomes. If mental health outcomes weren't there, it got excluded. So we only went to self-regulation after there was evidence of the first 2 variables. That was to save time because our measures of self-regulation were had more inference and needed some expert knowledge to differentiate whether it was top-down, controlled regulation versus bottom-up regulation. So you can see here that Elicit produces those answers with parenting as the first, youth mental health. So if it's not mentioned there, we're starting to think it's probably not there. I always cross-checked it with an actual article to make sure that it was not there, because Elicit, they makes mistakes. But if there was evidence, like there was positive parenting, we saw parenting stress, we saw some ADHD symptoms, these are all indicating, yes, there's at least one measure here that we're probably going to need to look into. So this is Elicit's answer for each of the different constructs. It gives its rationale here for the different answers that it provided. And then these little numbers here take you right into the document, the article, since I put a PDF in there, where in the PDF it got that information. So it allows you to jump in and out of an article without having to read the full text. And you can do it in whatever way you want to do it, right? In whatever way is most efficient for your decision making. And then you can directly link to the paper through here, and it'll open up the article for you. So there's a lot of nice things about making that decision making. Another nice thing is if I were to create, right, so I created this data extraction for inclusion, exclusion, I can share it, right? Give somebody an email and give them access to view it if I wanted them to be using the Elicit information in this way. And so there's a nice way to share if you're collaborating with team members. And then there's also a way to export it. So if you click on the CSV, it'll export it into an a CSV Excel file. It's messy in Excel, so I'll demonstrate here. This was 22 papers that we pulled from Excel for our review. And we created a macro to just format it better. So when we were coding studies, we had things in the order that we wanted them to be and got rid of any unnecessary information, which really saved us a lot of time. And so you can see here the answers, the descriptions here from this. These are direct quotes from the study. It's reasoning for this study, or why it said it was a quantitative study, and then its answer, yes, it's a quantitative study. And then we can go here. It gives the participant age as, it didn't find a participant age, but it gives you information, more information here, which is interesting, is sometimes it says it doesn't have an answer, but if you go into its rationale and logic, you can get an answer here. Participants were 13 to 28. So it helps us decide whether we need to probe further into the article or whether if it was adults, we would have just excluded it. So those were the ways that we pulled out data from Excel. Questions or things that you saw that you want me to demonstrate in Elicit that came to your attention as I was working through it? Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious about that one you just said, because it said that the ages were 13 to 28 that didn't give an answer. Did you see that often?
So, yeah, what was interesting, again, this was about a year ago, what we noticed completely by accident was that Elicit was saying in the platform it couldn't find an answer. When we exported the data, there was a rationale and logic that provided an answer. So sometimes exporting it gave us a little bit more information. I think playing with both forms could be really helpful if you're seeing it didn't provide an answer. Sometimes I think that might be a result of high accuracy. Elicit is holding itself to a higher threshold, so it might say, I don't have an answer, but when you look at what it used to come up with that, there's enough information that somebody who knows the literature could say, that's acceptable. So the way that I see Elicit is very much a human AI interaction and never relying on it completely by itself.
So I guess a quick question and a longer question.
Yeah.
A quick question, when you're sharing your notebook,
Yeah.
does that person need to have an Elicit account? And if you have a pro account, can you share like with a student for free?
I think they can view it, but I don't know. I'll look to Jesse and Ellen. The sharing is new. I've only shared with Elicit folks, so I haven't shared actually with the student yet.
Okay.
I would have to look into it. I'm not an expert. I believe you have a pro account, you cannot share that same level of applicability with it.
Free accounts, you can view, but you can't edit.
Yeah, that was what I was going to. You could view it, but you can't manipulate it in any way. But I'm not entirely sure. What Elicit just came out with this week is that they have a Teams level, purchasing level, where you can have multiple people make a purchase, and it's cheaper, it's more expensive than just a single Elicit Pro, but not much more, a couple hundred more, and then it allows multiple people to be on that account and using it, which I think would be really good for students, if you have a lab for students. I don't know how often you can add and remove folks into that, but that might be if you're working with other folks.
Yeah.
But this is where we were working with just my account. I would output the data, and then I would share it with my colleague, and she was just working from the Excel files. Yeah, and Jesse was doing that too. I got to give credit to Jesse. Jesse was also creating these files for us, and there were a bunch of people who were working through these files.
Okay, and you also said that it took you a while to figure out the correct prompts. What should we know when we start that we could, to get us up the learning curve? What was the secret to a good prompt list?
Yeah, for us, it ran counter to what Elicit was saying. And we talked with them about it. Good prompts often have examples, right? They'll give, and I think I can probably show you some of these examples here. They'll say, here's what I'm looking for, here's an example of what that could look like. And we would do that, we would say, parenting could look like harsh discipline, it could look like parental warmth, it could look like parent-child attachment, self-regulation could look like, physiological regulation, emotional regulation, cognitive regulation. But it didn't pick up on that with the self-regulation was really challenging for Elicit. It was also really challenging for us as coders, and so those really high inference codes, even for experts to agree on, I think poses challenges to Elicit, and you'll see that in some of the results that we have. Let me see if they have. So for us, example, right? This is their preset. So they give an example of what it looks like. They have a lot of writing for us, for the really straightforward prompts, there's not much for age. It does, you can tell it to specify by subgroups. So we had parents and children tell it if there are subgroups within the sample, give us the mean age by subgroup. We would give examples of that and it wouldn't work. We'd pull the example and it would work. So what we found was relatively minimal, like you can see how minimal, like this is super minimalist, and this is just saying for self-regulation, give us a little bit more detail. When we didn't have this, it wasn't picking up on the executive functioning skills, which is really, I don't know why that was, to be honest. And Elicit didn't know why either. We were going back and forth with them. So I think starting out as simple as you can actually works better in many ways. Does that answer?
Yeah, that's good.
And then it was just a constant revision of looking at, we had a known sample, like a small known sample, and then when we didn't get what we were expecting, we would go and revise. We were making sure that we were getting what we wanted with the known answers before we actually ran them.
Okay, so that's actually like something we should probably all do. Then you pick your whatever 20 or something like that, and then run it to get the prompts right.
Yeah, we did it with a sample of about 5 to 10, and I'll show you, now that you're asking, I'll show you Elicit. Elicit has set up a really nice, so this is a new functionality that's, I'm not sure, I think it's out, but it's, they're still beta testing it. You have to write like a research question, but you'll see what they allow you to do. It's built into this. So you have to start with a research question. It gives you feedback on whether it's a good question or not. And then you can move forward. Elicit automates, will automatically populate steps for you, but you have choices within those steps to change it. So here, this is, you're defining what you're screening for, and then this is where, you're adding in all of these variables, and then if you continue, here's where you're defining before they set it up, so here, I have a total of almost 500 articles that were found. They only choose 10 for you to do that prompt engineering multiple times on that. So they built that in as part of the process. And so you would just keep practicing and revising and engineering the prompts. And then once you're confident with the prompts, then you run extraction and it does it on all 500. So they've set it up in a way that's very much modeling that. Yeah. Other questions? So I've demonstrated these different stages within Elicit and then how you can get data out of Elicit. About a year ago, my colleagues, Jamie DeCoster and Xavier, who's at SUNY, we said, let's make something, this meta-analysis was huge to begin with. Let's make something of this as we move along the process, and we were in that stage of inclusion-exclusion where we wanted to expedite the process, but also have high accuracy. And we wondered if Elicit might be able to expedite our decision-making at the inclusion-exclusion phase. We had used Rayan at title abstract. We had, I'll show you what we did since it was such a large study. So it was a meta-analysis of mediation, 3 variables that we were looking at. MESAM does not require all 3 variables to be present, but we made that so that our study was as rigorous as it could be. So we required that to be included. The study had to measure parenting behaviors, youth self-regulation, and youth mental health. I can go into details if you're interested in the constructs. We had predefined criteria, what that looked like. the search, thanks to the magical and magnificent Jesse Ackman, produced 42,000 articles. We deduplicated those articles. We removed articles that were either not retrievable or were in a language other than English. That got us down to 21,000 that we did title and abstract screening on. This was my sabbatical, y'all. I was just reading title abstracts, running on my elliptical. We screened about 18 to 20,000 at this point. But then when we were doing the evaluation, we took a sample. At the time that we were starting the evaluation, we knew that we had over 1,600 that needed full text reviews, that made it past title abstract and needed to be full text reviewed. And so we took 1,200 of those articles and created a randomized controlled evaluation of Elicit. And I'll describe that a little bit more. It's going backwards. Just a second. Okay, so we have our 5 inclusion-exclusion criteria. I showed you some of those examples of these 3 here, our age requirement, and whether it's a quantitative study or not. 1,200 papers were randomly assigned to condition, being either the use of Elicit or no Elicit, and then there were 2 coders. It was Shai and me coding them, and everything was independent. Like, we reduced dependency across the different conditions. So it was a highly controlled evaluation of Elicit. We first examined, right, we had these 5 criteria. Here, I'll show you, wait, let me go back, because I'm going to show you something a little bit more sense when I bring up our coding file. We had a coding file here of all the articles. This is my coding file, so you see I'm the only coder that's listed. But we exported, these are the individual articles. This is the condition of whether it was without Elicit, and then our decision about whether to include it or not. And we would time ourselves in all of the conditions. We would then code, as 1 or 0 whether we could use, so this is only an Elicit condition, whether we could make a decision as a coder using only Elicit information. We never had to go to the article. Elicit provided enough for us to say, yes, it's enough information to move it forward as being included, and then we would give 0s when Elicit didn't give us enough information to make a determination. And that's for each of our 5 variables. And so we were looking at specifically how well could we make decisions just using Elicit, not having to read the full article, and then whether it would reduce the time to make a decision about whether to include or not include. And so when we just look at whether we could code papers, again, I want to be clear, no decision was ever made without a human making that decision. We never entirely relied on Elicit. But we used those Excel files in Elicit for these 2, we had 2 low inference criteria, meaning we could pretty quickly, right, pretty easy to determine whether it's quantitative and the age of the children in the study. When we were coding those, that Elicit, we were able to make decisions on almost 99% of those articles just on Elicit information. Pretty high for age as well. We see it starting to go down just a little bit for parenting behaviors. Elicit would sometimes get confused with like parental mental health. If a parent has depression, that doesn't necessarily mean anything about their parenting behaviors, and so we'll get a little bit confused about that. And then mental health of whether they measured variables like internalizing, externalizing, depression, anxiety. Where Elicit struggled the most was with self-regulation, but it still performed pretty decently if we're giving it a grade. I got a pretty solid B there. So this was helpful for us to say the way we're interpreting a lot of this is we can engineer prompts. Once those prompts are engineered, the interface is pretty easy to use. Students could readily do that, right? They could be involved in that process. they could also likely make decisions using Elicit and be involved in the meta-analytic decision-making for a vast majority of these variables. For some of the higher inference variables, it would probably require a check on a decision that a student might make, for example. And Elicit is thinking in terms of that, of allowing, you can have somebody go into the systematic review, one person can make a decision and another person can come in and override that decision. So a student could be involved in that, and then an expert could come in and change the decision if they wanted to. So pretty good outcomes for how we can make decisions just using Elicit's information. The main interest for us was whether it would reduce the time to make decisions on inclusion, exclusion, and it did. It was significantly faster using Elicit with the human coder versus just the human coder by about 17 seconds per paper. Some people might think, oh, that's not that big of a deal, but we had almost 2,000 of them. That adds up, right? So it decreased our workload by 20% across all 1,200, well, I guess it would be 600 papers that were Elicit. And that was across our study a savings of almost 6 hours of work. So there's some decent reduction in workload. So what does this all mean? Well, we do believe that Elicit does provide pretty decent information about selection criteria for inclusion and exclusion stage. It reduced our decision time. I'll add that we examined this decision time reduction by controlling for 5 other variables, including whether it was a dissertation, because we know dissertations usually take longer than articles because they're lengthier, whether it was, we controlled for coders, we controlled for the year of the publication, what order it was in coding, and so we controlled for a variety of other variables, and it still remained a significant reduction in time, even when we control for other variables and characteristics of the coders in the studies. Things that I felt like were particularly helpful is how it organized content the way I wanted it organized, which was nice. That certainly saves a lot of time when you're looking for details, if it's organized in the order that you want it to be in. I think there's a lot of possibility of delegating work and bringing students in to be involved in the meta-analytic process and to be a part of this research, which I think is really exciting. And we are going to be continuing to work with Elicit to look at how well Elicit can code effect sizes between the 3 variables that we're looking at, as well as moderator variables like the percent of boys and girls in the study, percent historically excluded minoritized individuals, a variety of different moderators. Elicit is particularly interested in how well Elicit can reproduce and replicate existing meta-analyses, so I'm also working on that evaluation with them. This work has involved a lot of people that I want to give credit to. The team that's involved in the actual meta-analytic SEM paper involves some colleagues. Lauren is an Elon and not alone. Mara Edwards was also involved in some of the screening process. And then Alan and Jesse, many thanks for all the times I call them with random questions, and some funding from Elon. So, thank you.
So, Amy, this has been on my mind for a couple months now. And I'm still not really sure what this is the best kind of question, because I'm not really sure what my question is. So, on the one hand, Kristen has already said that they're thinking about AI and meta-analyses and will be making guidelines. And the thing about meta-analyses is that they're mostly bad because they're underpowered, because when I come to you with 42,000 studies, you run away.
Yeah, I was going to say, because they don't have you on them? I'm serious.
So if this gets people to be more inclined to sort through that number, that seems like an unambiguous thing to me. But on the other hand, to me, the watchword for all things evidence synthesis is reportable and repeatable.
Yeah.
And AI is great at a lot of things, but those are the 2 things that it's probably worst at, is saying what it did and then doing that a second time. What do you make of it? Does that feel like a compromise? Does that feel like does the benefits outweigh the drawbacks? Does it feel like something else? What do you think?
I'm a compromiser, but I'm also, I think if I had to choose, I'm going with the Prisma, Boolean, reproducible, like I'm a scientist, right? This is science, it has to be reproducible, and you have to be able to replicate it. So I see Elicit as, at this point, an assistant in coding, and it does that pretty well because there's not, right, I'm sure it hallucinates and it has problems around it, but the vast majority of it is pretty high accuracy. I like that it provides its rationale and where it found it, which I think is unique. So it's not reproducible in the broader sense of science, but it's reproducible and you can verify it in the article. So I think that that's pretty nice that they've made it really transparent where you can easily click on and go right to the section of the article where they're getting that information. But I've sort of grappled with that too, especially because they asked me recently to do a rapid replication. They've got this new research report function, and you also have to be careful, like Elicit, if you're just using Elicit as it is, it was only culling information from abstracts. And in psychology, there's never enough information in the abstract to fully code what you need for a meta-analysis. And I know that they're aware of that, like they appreciate that and they're aware of that. But this idea of, I've always sort of had to toy with, they move fast in AI and I move slow in science. Because I'm sure they're ready for us to be like moving on to the next stage, but we're still stuck in this screening thanks to you. But I do think the beauty of it is, what you also said in your question was, it pulls folks in when they might have otherwise run away. So it means that you start with Elicit to make it tractable and doable for you, then I think there's beauty in that, but I would still say you have to do the search, and if you're working with Jesse, you're going to have a 20-page search list in multiple databases. And that might scare folk, right? I don't think most people do that. And so I would say the value of the Boolean is also bringing in a library science expert. And Elicit doesn't do that.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
So there was a logistic error. I asked people to bring the food inside, but they didn't bring it. And I believe it's late for all of us. Please feel free to go to grab your food, and then we are going to come back. We can continue to networking and question answering piece. They are ready there.